We back in the lab, we making some noise, so go turn your decibels up. Black skin, white coat, oh no, who was nice as us? Made Jimison, really told us no limit, so we about to take us up. Went from mixing in the kitchen to the lab, and now I can make this up. Whoa! B-SCI, be scientist, B-SCI, be scientist. We shining a light on the people of color to show them how fly it is. B-SCI, be scientist, B-SCI, be scientist. We back in the lab with white coats on our back, trying to show what time it is. Hey!
The B-Scientist Podcast, the podcast by the Black Science Coalition Institute, or B-SCI. When you hear this noise, that is our in-podcast citations. So please go to b-sci.org/B-Scientist to see all of our citations ever. I am geoarchaeologist Jordan Chapman, and as always, we got the dope chemist herself,
Jana Carpenter.
And today, we have assistant professor at UCLA, archaeologist, and National Geographic Explorer, and co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists, Dr. Justin Dunnavant. How are you?
Appreciate y'all. I'm doing good out here in sunny California, so I can't complain.
Fair enough. Yeah, we had thunderstorms today in Georgia, so I mean, that sounds nice. Well, cool. We're happy to have you on. So we usually just get started by asking our guest about, how they got into their field. So you're an archaeologist, which is cool because you're the first other archaeologist to be on the show besides myself. And you're one of the co-founders of the Society of Black Archaeologists. So please walk us through how you got into archaeology.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't know anything about archaeology until I got to college. I was an international business major, just trying to do a study abroad somewhere. And the only sort of program that didn't have a prerequisite was to join an archaeology crew, sleep in a tent in the middle of the rainforest in Belize, and dig holes in the ground.
Right.
And I said, sign me up. So I checked it out. Field school went great. I realized there weren't too many people that look like us that do this work. I was at Howard University. And of course, students are mostly African-American, but from all over the diaspora and from all over the continent. But no, none of the professors were. And so that opened up a possibility for me to then see how I could fit in that unique space. And my professors were really supportive of it. And I guess over 15 years later now, I'm here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was kind of curious because you have a decent amount of experience just across different types of roles you've played in. And now that you're a faculty member, what were some of the things or challenges or advantages that you've gained from all of your different experiences leading up to now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess my background has always been diverse in the sense of the topics that I study and the way I study them. And part of it has been intentional because the questions that I'm asking and that we're asking require all of these different interdisciplinary perspectives. So oftentimes I'll think of something, I'll see a question, and then I might not know how to do it, but I might know somebody who does. So my goal has always been to learn just enough to be dangerous, to ask the right questions, and then find somebody who really knows what they're talking about and plug them in.
That's smart.
Yep. And so because of that, my work touches on everything from ecology to marine science to heritage preservation and legal aspects of heritage to everything in between. And as a result of that, I've been able to actually supervise and guide a lot of different students in different ways. I'm able to talk to colleagues in many different areas and know just enough about their subjects to elaborate on it. My roommate in grad school was an electrical engineer, and I had to proofread his dissertation. So I know all about delayed tolerant networks if we ever wanted to go that route. And it causes me then to think about exactly. But now it allows me to ask questions related to archaeology that might have more like hard science, electrical engineering backgrounds or computer science backgrounds. So yeah, it's been a while.
I didn't know that about you, actually, which is interesting because I did know that you were a diver and you have I forget what it's called. It's it's a scientific diving license. So that makes a little bit more sense now, actually. Can you talk about that for us, though?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm trained predominantly as a terrestrial archaeologist. My last year of grad school with the Society of Black Archaeologists, Dr. Ayanna Flewellen and I had the opportunity to get into underwater archaeology after meeting colleagues with Diving with a Purpose, which is a nonprofit that does underwater archaeological work and assists a number of government organizations in that work. They reached out to us and said, we have lots of Black scuba divers. We have no Black underwater archaeologists. Can we set up some type of program or figure out a way to change this? And so they sort of used myself and Dr. Llewellyn as the test subjects. And we worked on our swimming a bit. And then from working on the swimming, they taught us how to dive. From diving, they got us working on shipwrecks and underwater heritage. And it just opened up a whole new world for us because, again, we're mostly looking for African diaspora history underground. Now with underwater experience, we can ask those same questions underwater. And there's a whole host of sites that still need to be excavated, still need to be located, and some that have been located but need to be interpreted or reinterpreted. So there's a whole new field out there.
That's
No, that's
really
dope as
cool.
hell.
So I kind of have I guess like a two-part question, and I'm gonna have to tell on myself on the first one because I personally cannot swim, and I know that you two as archaeologists might have some insight on some potential generational like trauma from certain events that might have happened along the way.
Yeah.
So what is that like?
Yeah.
You said you have a lot of African American divers, and have you ever like
Yeah.
explored those kind of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time. I think, the biggest misconception is this concept that people don't want to get their hair wet. And they normally attribute it to Black women, but I think even that's not a viable claim. And I don't really think it has been. Especially when you talk to women who are divers, that's like they ask, they have routines of what you do to prep for diving. But after that, that's not a question that comes up or a comment that comes up. What I found historically is a lot of Black people that don't know how to swim don't know because they weren't trained in a swimming pool. And if you go back historically with segregation, we didn't have access to swimming pools. Most people learn in a swimming pool. The ocean has riptide, it's inconsistent. There's a whole lot of things that cause issues with swimming in the ocean. So because of that, there's a lack of our parents' generation, really our grandparents' generation, and then from that, the fears of the parents being able to swim as well. Now we're at a point where a lot more of us are learning how to swim, getting engaged in the water. A lot of it becomes an issue of knowledge and access now around scuba diving, mainly because scuba diving is a very expensive activity. It is very much a sort of niche activity as well. You're not going to find opportunities for kids to go diving, especially if you don't live near water, which is a whole other issue. And all those things. And I tell people there are some psychological aspects to diving as well. I've kind of boiled it down to two now. People who are okay with swimming, but they can't stand the idea of scuba diving. There's usually, I tell people there's a claustrophobia. They're usually afraid of being contained, which seems awkward considering the ocean is so vast, but makes sense when you realize you're engulfed in water. And then the other one is this sort of psychological fear of suffering or the idea of suffering because they're afraid of drowning. And when you boil it down, it's really not the idea of drowning. It's the idea of being in a state that you lose control. So oftentimes we do a little bit of psychological work with folks before we get them into the water. But once you get through those, it's an amazing experience.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually. And I for one, like I just cut my hair recently and I'm totally fine with getting it wet at this point. It's in a natural state, I can figure out what to do with it later. But but I guess my second question was, what is terrestrial archaeology? Because I am clueless.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so archaeology falls under the field of anthropology in the United States. And it's really the study of humans and the human experience through material culture. So the things that humans have made, things that they've built, and then other sort of related tangible objects, ways in which they interact with the environment. We tell people that's different from paleontology and other studies of dinosaurs and other quote unquote prehistoric mammals. But yeah, that's generally what archaeology is. We normally don't even use the term terrestrial archaeology because generally when people say archaeology, that's what they mean. But terrestrial would just be that on land excavating in the ground, and then underwater. Sometimes it's called underwater archaeology. Sometimes they use the term maritime or nautical if they're talking about sort of ports and other areas associated with water, but aren't necessarily under the water.
Cool. Interesting. I never made the connection of like the difference in terminology between like nautical versus underwater. Like in my head, even as an archaeologist, I've been like, if you're saying marine archaeology, I'm like, oh, you're talking about underwater. But I never really made the connection of like if it's just like, identifying like a port or something, and it's not entirely the same. But that's interesting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It can get nuanced.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
keep those surface level conversations, and then when you get into it,
Fair enough. So I mean, I think that's interesting too because I kind of already knew about you like through the grapevine, I guess. But like the first place I was like, oh, that's Justin. Was like I was watching. I'm like into like all types of science communication. So the first place, like I love Vox. Like I love watching like Vox explain. So
yeah.
then I saw the pirate one, and I was like, no fucking way. And so, and I was like, wait a second, this dude's talking about pirates right now. That's crazy. So talk about how that happened. How do those conversations even come up? Like how did Vox just reach out to you? Like how does that stuff work?
Yeah, yeah. Vox reached out. I think somebody must have recommended my name. They reached out. They said they're doing this special on pirates.
Mhm.
They did essential cold call, and then from there we did just a general run through where they were like, "We just want to, talk to you for an hour about what you know about pirates and slave
Mhm.
trade and the research you're doing." And so I talked to them, and then after that hour, they were like, "Okay, we want to come out and film you." And I told them, that's fine, but I'm going to be doing field work. So if y'all can get down to do field work, then you're more than happy to do it. So they at the time they drove down from New York to Virginia and filmed. So that segment was actually filmed at Monticello
Oh,
because we
nice,
were
dope.
analyzing artifacts over there. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But I mean, that opened it up to a whole other world where, again, science communication is a thing, as you mentioned, that we're actively trying to explore. I think it will only get bigger now too, especially with the fact that critical race theory is under attack and all these other
Mhm.
things are being attacked in the school system. That leaves a new space for science communication to really pick up and expand in those areas. And since then, I've done a couple more things for TV, and other people have seen my face and my name around. So it's been expanding in good ways, and it's gone from a point of us reacting to whatever they want to do to them now asking us, what do we want to do?
Right.
So that's going to get exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because I am just now like in grad school and like talk of government grants and things like that are finally starting
Yeah.
to click and I can almost understand it. But I've kind of noticed a trend of like more anthropology grants and research being funded. Have you noticed a trend like that, or is there something about anthropology that's become more important, especially for people of color?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that part of that is a deliberate, concerted effort. When COVID and Black Lives Matter hit, we were reached out by the Society of Black Archaeologists was reached out to by a number of different organizations, and well, this is public knowledge now. One of the organizations that reached out was the Winogrand Foundation, which is one of the
Mhm.
largest funders of anthropological research. And we had a series of calls with the director and the organization, and from that we set up regular conversations with us in Society of Black Archaeologists, the Indigenous Archaeology Collective, a few people associated with Winogrand Foundation, and they asked us, what could we do to help in this matter and in this time when we realize there's disparity and other issues in the field. And so we said, what you could do is get all the major funders in anthropology in one room, and then we said you can go back also and get all the major archaeology center directors together in one room. And so we've been having monthly calls with all the major archaeology center directors for over a year now. And monthly calls, we used to have monthly calls with all the major funders in anthropology. And the wild thing about all this is that, they came to us in response to this Black Lives Matter situation. We found out that they had never actually met at all, ever, together.
Oh,
So now this is the first time when they're saying, "Oh wow, we actually have a lot of power," and we reminded them, "You all have the ability to determine what direction this field goes, based off of what you determine are the research initiatives and the goals." And so some new funding opportunities came out as a result of that, and it's since spiraled out into all these other new projects. And we're actually talking about restructuring some of these grants the way they're written, being more explicit about community engagement and community impact. In some ways, funding those aspects intentionally, so it's not just something you have to scrape together funds with at the end of the day. And then science communication as another element of that too. So yeah, we're excited to see how all those things are starting to change now in this time.
for sure. So I'm sure I've heard the story at least once before, but can you take us back a little bit in time to like when you guys started having a conversation of about how we're going to form the Society of Black Archaeology?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So we started my first year of grad school at University of Florida. Dr. Diana Fluellen was then a senior undergrad,
Mhm.
and I had been living in Jamaica for the last year. Came to Gainesville, two very different demographics. I'll just leave it at that. And I had always, I went to Howard undergrad, so I knew of Florida A&M, but I had never visited. So they had a Black Psychology conference my first year. So I asked a couple friends if they wanted to take the drive up to check it out, and Ayana said, "Sure, let's do it." So we went up there to the conference, and really came back and said, they've been able to make a unique space within the field of psychology that allows them to ask their own research questions, conduct their work in their own way, and really build out this field of Black psychology. What would it look like for us to do that in archaeology? And on the drive home, we started taking notes. We got back to the house. At the time, I think actually Ayana actually lived in the apartment underneath me as well. So we were like constantly scheming together. And we sent an email out to all the Black archaeologists we knew and said, "We're starting this organization. If you don't want to be a part of it, let us know." And nobody responded. So we said, "Great, we got full membership now, and we got full names of new people." And then we had our annual Society for Historical Archaeology conference coming up. So we sent out another email that said, "We're going to meet in the lobby at this time on this date. If anybody's interested, let's meet." And we had about 6 people show up. Actually, it's probably around 6 to 9 people. It was the most anybody in that group had ever seen Black archaeologists collect. And we had Dr. Teresa Singleton and Dr. Warren Perry in the room. And that's the second and third African American to get a PhD in archaeology. And from that, it was like, okay, we got something going. And if we can get the full spectrum of archaeologists in this room.
Right. Now that's dope. I am upset at COVID because SHA was in Philly this year, and I'm from Philly, and I was so upset, so upset. Like, but I completely understand, obviously, and Philly was going through with COVID this year because we met in Boston. That's the first time I met you.
Yeah.
So like, I knew, and like I found out in Boston, which was like right before COVID hit, that it was going to be in Philly in like 2 years, and I was like, I can't wait, and like, so, but I am happy though because like, having that experience in Boston, just being in a room with like so many Black art, it is transformative. Like I never would have expected that. And I honestly, it's weird too because I know like SBA is kind of like still kind of in some of its formative years, but like I, it's just interesting like that it happened at that point, and then like how much change from that point into now, and like how big SBA has been getting since. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, we're happy to have you. Yeah, it's definitely growing beyond we could even imagine. And I think that's part of the ways we've been trying to actively think about how to restructure it. And, thankfully organizing work that we've done in undergrad and other areas has paid off because we're actually trying to figure out what does the succession plan look like and yeah, all those things. So it's been good.
Dope.
I mean, I'm definitely taking notes. I'm like the idea to just send people like, "Hey, if you don't want to be in this, then let us know." Like that's so smart. I would have never thought to do that.
Yeah, that's a good one. We should have done it.
Yes, you have to make it difficult for people not to be involved. And you got to make it look cool too. That's the other thing we've been telling people.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that one down and use that later.
Yeah,
for sure. But Jenna, do you had another question?
I lost track of it because I was so amazed at the thought of doing that. Let me see.
Yeah, no worries, I can talk for days.
Because I've been like trying to get an organization off the ground in my department, which is chemistry, for other students, and it's so difficult to get. I think just scientists in general are just awkward, and we don't like meeting up in person. It's just social anxiety or whatever. And so I that's kind of perfect because if they have to like make the decision like, no, I don't want to do this, then maybe just maybe they'll show up.
Right.
I will say with organizing, I mean, two key things. I could not have, I mean, Ayana and I, we had to do it collectively. I can't imagine one person actually making a successful organization. And then the other element of it too is this idea of getting buy-in from individuals. So we had very loose ideas in terms of what the organization was going to be because we intentionally wanted new incoming members to help guide the direction of it. And I've always said, organizations are never stagnant. They're not going to be the same as the way they were started. And not all the membership will stay throughout the course of the year. So it could be, 10, 15 years from now, SBA does things that I'm not gonna say agree with, but that I'm not necessarily interested in. And maybe it's time to start a new organization, or maybe, there's other ways to work around that. But being able to give up your child, or, this thing that you've created, is an important element of all this work.
I do agree to that. With B-SCI, I definitely look forward to the day where I'm like, all right, president number 1, I'm happy to be 1, but 2, I'm like, if we get to 2, that's amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
So I do look forward to that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've mentioned a lot of the different grants that you've been able to be involved in. And for one thing, I know I do at least, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but it is so hard to write ways that you'll be diverse and inclusive, because you are the diverse and inclusive group of people that need to get funding. So how do you talk about that type of thing in an application, just in general? Because I
Yeah.
always get really uncomfortable with those sections, because I'm like, well, should I just describe myself and my own upbringing? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm intentional and unapologetic about it. I always say, too, part of the goal is to constantly train the replacement. So any project we do has a training component involved in it. And that's when I'm very explicit about who I'm targeting, how I'm targeting them, what the research is that will positively impact underrepresented communities, and some type of plan to then mentor on the back end. And that's something that everybody can do, regardless of background. Of course, if you come from certain backgrounds, working in certain communities, you have better access to certain areas and certain abilities, which allow you to then just think bigger and expand even larger. So, for me, it was I guess I cheated a little bit, because I could say I co-founded the Society of Black Archaeologists, and that's a whole organization dedicated to this.
It
But
helps.
it does help. But, even in my lab and everything else, I train my students to also think about training, so that we have tiered structures of professor, graduate student, undergraduate student, and they're all working on similar projects or working with each other, so you can learn those steps along the way. And then taking people and reaching out to people outside of academia is even more critical. So actively thinking, my goal is to get young people, because I'm learning as we go through this. Specifically in archaeology, I've studied literally how people get interested in archaeology, because I asked them the same questions you asked me at the start of this meeting. A lot of young people are interested in archaeology. It usually wanes at around age 11 or 12, because all the toys are made for previous, and there's no entertainment to keep them engaged past that. These kids don't know who Indiana Jones is.
That's
Laura Croft isn't considered an archaeologist to most people. And so as a result of that, their interest and knowledge of archaeology dies at around 10 or 11. What we've been saying is we actively need more content to keep them engaged beyond that. And then we need programs like, summer scuba programs, or, just outdoors programs to keep them physically involved in related areas as they're growing up and getting into that. So that's the sort of bigger picture vision, which you'll start to see different projects and programs roll out over the next 5 years or so to address some of that. Yeah.
Dope.
Yeah.
I want to kind of piggyback off of that, actually, because I kind of work in plantation archaeology, and I know you kind of also do too, and I know a lot of people at SBA do. So I want to hear from you about how it is to work with this aspect of history that is very, very painful to learn about sometimes from a systematic standpoint, because I know it can be challenging for me, so I imagine it would be for you, but I just kind of want to hear your ideas about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I get similar questions, or people assume often as well, all the time. So yeah, it's good to lay it out. For me, it's interesting. So just to put it in context, most archaeologists that work in African-American archaeology and in the African diaspora tend to study slavery. And that's in part because it's uniquely situated. We all know it was a major experience, but also a lot of the written records have been biased. So archaeology has this unique, immediate, and pressing opportunity to shed light on a community that we don't have a lot of written records about, particularly our own community. As a result of that, there's a lot of archaeology done on slavery, a lot of archaeology done on plantations. It can be very difficult to process if you're constantly dealing with slavery, reading archives about slavery, doing that whole experience. And sometimes it can get siloed to where you associate your past and everything about you with this very traumatic event. For me, I've been conscious of moving beyond that. So we do a lot of work in slavery and the slave trade. And I tell people that's critical work, but part of the reason that's critical is reclaiming these voices, pulling out evidence of and understandings of how people actually made life during these troubling times. And for me, that's motivation then, because I'm saying, look, if these people are able to do this under these conditions, the things I'm worried about, this ain't nothing. This is all
Right.
gravy. So,
Fair
so it
enough.
gives me motivation in that way. And then I've been more intentional about doing work in archaeology that's not necessarily related to slavery. So
Hmm.
a lot of the underwater archaeology work that we've done, there's new projects, Diving with a Purpose, been doing around Tuskegee Airmen plane wrecks underwater. There's a lot of post-emancipation archaeology sites that people are working at, free Black communities and towns. And then, of course, my next project that we're working on goes way beyond that. And I can talk about that later as well.
Cool. I didn't know you we're going to have to talk about it because I didn't know you were working on something.
Yeah.
Cool, cool.
Always.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about, we kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, and I know it's probably a little different in California than it is here in Georgia, but the whole notion of this ban on critical race theory and whatnot, has that been a topic or something that you've had to reevaluate in your own courses and things like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Thankfully, I haven't here. I was at University of Florida, where even though they didn't have that mandate, you could still feel like tension in the room when the conversations would come up and have to address it in certain ways. The beautiful thing about being over here is I feel like I don't necessarily need to do that as much, although there are needs, of course, to clearly articulate these things. I was just on the radio in San Francisco last week, and this topic came up specifically in relationship to the things that are going on throughout the South right now. And then also there's a reparations committee that's happening here in California as well. And, I was talking to the host, and I told the host that I feel bad for the students in these school systems that are going to have to figure out a way, that aren't going to have this knowledge of critical race theory. They are going to be at the deficit. I said Black and brown communities have been educating our kids outside of and beyond the school system from the beginning. So we're going to find a way to get this information to our people. And it might come in the form of community lectures. It might come through other means. And this also reinforces the need for us to get more heavily involved in science communication and to find new and creative ways to develop programming around these topics, because they can ban it in the school system, but they can't ban it on television. They can't ban it on the radio. They can't ban it in the music and the lyrics, which is a
Right.
whole other conversation. So we're going to just have to branch out and do what we do best.
Yeah, that's so encouraging, honestly, because when I think about it, I got really honestly afraid for the future of me and the generations like coming after me. But I never really thought about it optimistically in the fact that we just have to become a stronger community, like as a whole. And that, yeah, there are other ways to like navigate this and have conversations about it. That's a really good takeaway from that. Thank you.
For
Yeah,
sure.
I try to see glasses as half full, and then if they're not half full, then we got to figure out a way to get it half full. So
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's a good outlook to have. Grad school has made me so cynical these days. I gotta
Bitter and
remind
disenchanted.
myself to stop doing that.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you asked about that earlier too, Jenna. What that transition has looked like as you become a professor. I mean, we've had people talk about that transition, but I know I think Justin that you're kind of you. I don't think you graduated that long ago, honestly, from like your PhD program.
Yeah, I feel like a perpetual student. I graduated in 2017, so it's been about 5 years since I had
Yeah.
my PhD. I did 4 years of postdoc and just started
Mm,
here at LA this year. Yeah, the transition has been interesting. For me, when I started the PhD and like committed to it, I was very intentional with how I was moving. So like my first year, I said, I'm going to be writing most of my life. I need to learn how to actually write. And I got the little Strunken White or Strunken White, whatever it is, the little book that teaches you like grammar, basic grammar rules. And I
Mm.
was watching videos and editing and doing all these things just to improve my writing. I did the same thing for public speaking. Started looking at how, how comedians are able to command a stage for an hour, and people will sit there and watch somebody just talk for 1 hour and enjoy it, and figured out, okay, what does timing look like, cadence, circle back, like all these things that you have to be aware of. And now with teaching, I'm actively doing the same thing. So I take notes after every class, every day, what jokes landed, what jokes didn't, what people were interested in, what they were really waiting for me to skip over. and really hoping to take that to another level so that we can really build this out. And then mentoring, and creating a lab, because that's something that we're never really taught to do, but is fundamental to the way that this whole system works, especially if we're trying to train our replacements and train more people in it. So this spring break, I just experimented with this idea of bringing all my lab students out to do field work for one student's dissertation.
Mm.
And the idea was that everybody would see what the process looks like in terms of how to set up a dissertation project, how to visit a field site, have the phone calls on speaker so everybody can hear the conversations and introduce themselves, and then, yeah, document it. And then they assisted one person in setting up their project. When the next person goes, we'll do the same thing. And now you've got experiences and resources in all these different areas, and you've seen it all coming. So hopefully it'll inform how they move forward, and build camaraderie too.
Right. I really like that idea actually, because that's one thing I've thought about as like I go through grad school. Is like how to become a good teacher and mentor. And that's definitely interesting that you've taken it to the point where you're like, I'm going to document how this is going to happen. And like, because that's not something that happens. And I won't necessarily lump UGA into that and say it's like on UGA. I think that's like a problem everywhere, that like we are expected to go from researcher at like the undergraduate level, and then once you're done with that, it's like, oh, go get a PhD, or not go get a PhD, but once you have your PhD, go get a researching job. And it's like, but you're probably going to have to do two and two, which usually means like some classwork or some coursework, and also some research. And that coursework part is where it's like, that's really crucial, because as you've been saying, since we started these conversations, that generation that's behind us, we're not really doing them a service if we're not actively trying to improve how we communicate that information. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And it's about understanding people's strengths and weaknesses and understanding what they like and don't like. Because if you get somebody that really likes an element of the work and is really committed to it, they can take it, 10 times where you could take it. And the questions they ask are going to be different. The way the research is done is going to be different. And that's just going to expand the field more widely.
So my next question is that you're National Geographic Explorer, man. Like, I just think about that sometimes, and I'm like, that is kind of mind blowing. Like, and that's mind blowing to me. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I had no idea what it was until I got it. And when I got it, I sat there and meditated on it for a little bit. Just literally like sat down in the corner of my apartment, like, what just happened to me?
Right.
Yeah, it's wild. It completely changed the game. And I didn't realize at the time like how transformative it was until I'm starting to see what it looks like now. But yeah, so the Emerging Explorer, for those who don't know, it's pretty much like you're nominated in a secret ballot by usually existing emerging explorers for this essentially award. Some people call it like a mini MacArthur. I don't know if that term holds up, but
Hey.
they give you a large chunk of money. You're allowed to do with whatever you're allowed to do, whatever you want. And the understanding is that you are doing something in your space or in your field that is going to be transformative. So we just want to support you in whatever way we can. So as an emerging explorer, they gave us this lump sum of money. I had to go to SBA and give SBA a donation off the top, and then started funding some of the ideas that I had. So now we have $1,000 field school grant that's allowed for non-US based archaeologists to help fund their research. And then we have two $500 conference assistance grants, which help people get to conferences anywhere in the world. And I did that as sort of seed funding to then be able to use that to fundraise so we can say we have these programs going. And then I used some of that fund as well to help fund my master's students' research when COVID shut down universities and we weren't allowed to use university funding for that. So that helped as well. But probably more than all of that is the fact that when you become one, they sort of introduce you to the network of National Geographic. And it really forces you to think differently about your work, because now you're talking to Nat Geo kids, you're talking to National Geographic Television, you're talking to people in very different spaces than what you would have traditionally done as a scientist or as an academic. So that's been exciting, and seeing how people are able to use these things and think differently about how their work is done and how it's presented has been good.
Yeah, man, that's congrats. That's amazing.
Appreciate it.
I guess my last question is, I've kind of noticed that there's kind of a, not necessarily a lack, but there's on the downcline of educators in general. And I kind of recently had this conversation where a faculty member kind of thought, postdocs are standard, like that's how it has to be if you want to be a faculty member or hold a tenure position. Is that something you've ever thought like a necessary part of your track into academia, or do you have any other thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the benefits of me being able to move the way that I move is that I was never beholden to this idea of staying in academia. I said my parents raised 4 kids without college degrees. I got a PhD. I'm sure I could take care of myself in some other field. I don't have to stay in academia if it don't work, if it don't suit me, if I'm not happy. So that was always in the back of my head. I had exit plans and plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, just in case plan A didn't work out.
Right.
So that was there. With that said, one of the other things I realized very early on in grad school was that academia is a game, it's a system. They're all based on metrics. And these metrics have been defined by the academy. They're different for different disciplines. So, hard sciences, y'all looking at H indexes, what publication records are, what's the impact of this research in the field. For me, I know what I need to do just to get enough to the point where people say, okay, that box is checked. That allowed me to say, okay, as long as I check this box, I can begin to create my own metrics. Because now I can say, okay, I did the paper and the publication. I'm doing terrestrial archaeology. I have a field school. I'm actually going to bring in and expand this program so we have a youth education component, so that we have TV and media on the site, so that we have a pipeline of training individuals. And then I'm going to publicize what I'm actually doing. And now that provides a metric where people are saying, okay, well, Justin did this. Are you all able to also build out a pipeline program? And now that pipeline program becomes something that gets praised as a sign of, effort in the field. So part of that requires that sort of thinking of what you want your metrics to be. And also realizing to separate yourself from academia, because one of the other things I learned in being from public institutions to private institutions, especially as a person of color, they will constantly shift these metrics any way that they want to, if they don't want you in them or if they don't want you participating in some way. So, some people might say, okay, the H index is what's important. How many publications, citations do you have? And then once you hit that mark, then they'll say, okay, well, we need top tier journals. How many top tier journals are you in? And then you get in there and they say, okay, well, are you in science or nature? And then you get there and then they say, okay, well, what is your other? And it just keeps going. It's never ending.
Right.
And so, again, that made me realize, like, okay, I don't need to be following your metrics. I'm going to do just enough to get the tenure and to do those things. But I'm going to set my own metrics and hold myself to a standard that's different.
So that's really mind opening, because one thing I've been thinking about, like, as just trying to get through grad school, is I am very on the fence about academia, and this will also lead into another question as I'm rambling, but so I've been thinking about that, and like, do I want to stay in academia as a geologist, archaeologist? But there are other avenues. So one thing I've thought about is doing like science policy and trying to figure out how to do that along with the science communication and helping out with the science communication that B-SCI does. So that's one way I've kind of thought about it. And it seems like you've kind of also like moved into some aspects of policy, because I know you're working on some legislative things. Is that a good way to phrase that? I don't know, but I know there's
that's
okay.
That's a good way to open it up.
Can you explain it for us?
Yeah, part of it too is Society of Black Archaeologists, as the organization has become bigger, it's gotten more clout and we've been able to do more things. And so I tell people, like, as we have access to more spaces, the type of work we do is naturally going to change. So it actually started out as a paper in a grad school class. I wrote a paper arguing for an African American version of NAGPRO and to see what that would look like in the United States. It was, a final paper for a class. I presented it at a conference. Turns out the president of the organization was sitting in the audience and said, we have a legislative component to our organization. We would want to seriously think about taking this up as an issue. And to their credit, Society for Historical Archaeology took that on and worked with legislators and developed a whole concept around it. A variation of it was proposed on the the Senate floor last year, and I believe proposed in the House this year, one of the two. It was proposed in Congress, and essentially it's arguing for the protection of African American cemeteries and burial remains, and it's funded in this latest iteration. This is after a series of conversations we had had with community members and people reaching out to us, upset about the fact that a lot of Black cemeteries are getting bulldozed, getting negatively impacted by power lines and other construction projects, and there was little or nothing they could do about it. There's also issues around heritage law. In order to be designated a heritage site, you have to have usually a burial site. You need to have somebody significant buried there. And based off of the way we know slavery and racism works, Black people weren't considered, quote unquote, significant in American history unless you were a Frederick Douglass or a Harriet Tubman.
Right.
So people who are prominent in their communities wouldn't have been in a position to be eligible for these nominations. But this legislation offers a new opportunity for that. So actually, I have to give credit to Chip Caldwell, who kind of pushed us to write a publication for Nature around this topic. And that's what led to an article that was arguing for this, which then led to larger conversations with a number of individuals. And it's been getting steam as more and more people are sort of gathering behind it. On the other end of that spectrum, I am now a board member for the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, which is the nonprofit of all of the marine sanctuaries in the United States. And that has been critical for me because I'm the only underwater archaeologist on that board. So they had been focusing mostly on marine biology and on water quality and sort of climate change issues. And now they're asking, what are we missing in terms of heritage? So now when they advocate on the Hill, we don't use the word lobbying, but when we advocate on the Hill,
Fair enough.
We have the ability to talk about cultural heritage that's underwater and the need to preserve and protect it as well. And I'm sure that, throughout the course of this work, there's going to be new spaces that I have access to that are going to change the way that all of this works. And just trying to constantly figure out how to use these avenues to expand the conversation and get more things done. I tell us, all my students, and I tell us as academics, chasing impact to me is more important than chasing a project. So what can I do that would have the biggest impact? And I realize as I progress in this work in different areas, my ability to have an impact that's bigger is going to look different, and I need to be able to change with that.
For sure. As you were talking about it, I'm like in my head, like I'm not a super religious person, but like I think about the ancestors, and I'm like you're literally doing like the ancestors work right there. Yeah. So that's amazing.
Say Ashe, yeah.
Right. Amazing. Jenna, do you have any final questions? I think you said you already.
I don't think so. I mean, I have thousands of questions, right? But
thousands. But we gotta let just.
Yeah, but just in general, I'm just really impressed with the work that you're doing, and I think we all find it really important to continue to speak on these things. And I just really appreciate you coming onto the show.
For sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
One thing we do at the end of each episode is we ask our guest, how do you encourage other people to be scientists?
Good question. I encourage it by showing that they're already doing it. Everything they do in their life is usually an experiment of some sort to either make themselves better or just out of their own inquisitiveness. And I encourage them to interrogate a lot of things that they see around them and ask, why is this happening? How is this happening? And how can I potentially change it? One of the things I tell people too is that, colonialism is a system and it's been developing and experimenting for over 500 years. It's not going to change overnight, but it also means that we have the potential to create an alternative system that either goes counter to it or runs separate from it. So that's where I wanted people to think, is that systems level thinking, where it's not an individual, a community, or an institution, but we're thinking about an entire system where just by our mere existence, we are perpetuating it, and others as well, by their mere existence, are perpetuating it. So that's one way I encourage them. And then, my latest project that I'm working on now, National Geographic messed up and asked me what would I do if I had unlimited resources. So I had to go to the drawing board, and I said, as a maritime archaeologist, I'd want to look for the Black Star Line and for Marcus Garvey's legacy underwater. And so that's what we've been kind of working on in the background for the last few months now. I had a chance to virtually meet Dr. Julius Garvey, Marcus Garvey's son, proposed the idea, and it got some good buy-in. And now we're starting this quest slowly but surely to begin to look for those wrecks.
That's amazing.
And see where that goes. Yeah. Again, it takes us beyond this conversation of slavery into a whole new area. So I'm excited to see it.
For sure. Well, this is a great conversation. Honestly, sometimes I was super excited to do this today because I remember when I first saw you in Boston, I saw you across the road and I was like, honestly, in my head, I was like, that's a celebrity right there. I got it. And I don't know if you remember, honestly, but I was so nervous to talk to you.
Oh man, I just remember. I think I bought you Dunkin' Donuts.
And that made it in my mind that I'm glad that, again, I said it a little bit a while ago, but this is why I'm happy to be a part of SBA, because just meeting someone who's basically a celebrity in Black archaeology, and then them having the, I don't know, but the spirit to just buy me a $2 cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. That is true. It's $2, but you really can't put a price on that. And I'm so happy that you did that, and that I got a chance to meet you, that you came on the podcast today.
Yeah, y'all got to break bread with each other,
Yeah,
beautiful.
literally.
Right.
Yeah. And I appreciate it because I think you probably just started B-SCI around that time, and
we kind of did, yeah.
Yeah. And now it's snowballed into this.
It's started.
Yeah.
And just to embarrass Jordan a little more, he was just like, Jana, he's been on Netflix. This man's been on Fox. This man is NatGeo. And I was like, that's insane.
I have been after you for a little while.
I appreciate it. But yeah, even that is you enter in that space and you're like, oh no, there are people that are doing this, and this as well. And so that bar changes now, and it's okay, what can we do with this?
For sure. But again, we're going to let you go. Again, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast. I truly appreciate it. I'm happy to be a part of SBA family. And Jenna, always thank you for being a dope chemist. And to everyone listening, don't forget to be scientists.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all.
Be Scientist is a podcast by the Black Science Coalition and Institute, or B-SCI, a 501c3 nonprofit. Be Scientist is hosted by both Jenna Carpenter, chemist and B-SCI's Research and Development Officer, and Jordan Chapman, geoarchaeologist and B-SCI's president. Music is produced by Delaralo, and lyrics are by Ed Gunner. Special thanks to Michael, Mike, Cast, and Marshall, and the Plaza Abbey Studios. If you'd like to donate to B-SCI, visit our official website, bsci.org. That's b-sci.org. Your donation supports Be Scientist and B-SCI's other projects. We couldn't do it without you. So please tune in next time, and always be scientists.